Okay, welcome to week 4. This is the Great Depression, and just like last week, I'm going to give you guys a broad overview of the topic, and then when you dive into your digital notebooks, that's when you're going to look more at how it impacted Texas specifically. Okay, so I'm going to keep this one kind of short. There's a lot of information here. It's very complex, but it's still relevant today because this event right here, this Great Depression, half of the systems that we have in place today for our financial safeguards, such as the Federal Reserve, which regulates money, and several systems within banks, all are a direct result because of this Great Depression. And one of the common misconceptions that people have is that the Great Depression was limited to just the United States. It wasn't. This economic depression impacted every part of the world. Okay, Europe especially. There's one country in particular that gets hit especially hard during the depression, and it's going to give it a lot of drive for a certain person to take power, and that guy's name is Adolf Hitler in Germany. Okay, so you can really trace a lot of the events that happen over the next 20 years because of the Great Depression. Okay. So, real quick, I'm gonna, like I said, I know there's a lot of information on these slides, so I'm just going to give you the overview and just kind of talk through this. But you do need to look at these slides when you take your quiz this week because this is where you're going to be drawing your information from. All right, so the 1920s, we know that the war ended. Okay, everything's kind of going back to normal. However, there are certain industries that have dominated the American market for the past 20 years that are now starting to struggle. Now, this is going to include stuff like railroads, steel, mining, lumber, all of these major industries that we as Americans have enjoyed being the top and helping people get jobs and helping feed money into the economy. These are going to start taking a hit. One of the biggest ones, however, is agriculture. And if you remember, even though Texas industrialized, meaning they started opening up more factories and manufacturing businesses during World War I, Texas is mostly agricultural. Okay, we grow cotton still. It's still a valuable commodity, and it will remain a valuable commodity for several years. But no other industry suffered as much as agriculture, and this is gonna spread across the United States. Because remember, during World War I, a lot of other countries that were impacted by the war, they needed food. Okay, well, who can grow food? The United States. So farmers enjoyed a lot of economic prosperity during the war because they were selling their crops and they were making money. The government was even subsidizing them, meaning the government was giving them money to grow certain kinds of food. Okay, well, now that's gone. So to sort of counteract that, they actually have increased production during the 20s. Now, I don't want to get too far into it, but here's the thing about an economy is that there's things that are called the law of supply and demand. Okay, this is what happens when you increase production. All right, so these farmers are increasing the production of, let's say, corn. All right, what happens is that increased that produced corn floods the market. Okay, so now you have an overabundance of it. When that happens, that means that the price of that commodity, so supply of corn goes up, the price of that commodity is going to go down. Okay, people don't need it as much, and as a result, it's not going to be worth as much. Okay, so when this happens, farmers start to take a hit. Okay, because they're producing something that people don't really need anymore, that people don't really want, and so they're not getting paid as much. All right, and this is going to impact many Texans. All right. The other thing is consumers are spending down. What that means is that consumers are buying less. Okay, prices are rising. Okay, when the reverse of that, meaning if you have a lot of things in the market, the prices are going to go down. The reverse of that is that if you have less of a supply, then the prices are going to go up. And that's what's going to happen in the 20s. People stop buying things. We are seeing this happen right now in the United States with the current situation with coronavirus. People are worried about their financial futures. People are losing their jobs. So therefore, they're not going to spend money on certain items. Okay, they're not going to go out and try to buy a new house right now. Okay, there's no security there for their finances, and as a result, the prices of houses are probably going to go up. Okay, because the demand is much lower and the supply is much higher. Okay. All right, and here's another thing that really kind of takes hold is that the gap between the poor and the rich, it becomes much more what we call marginalized, meaning that you can look on a graph and you can see how much spread, how much of a difference there is between the people at the lowest end of wealth as opposed to the highest end, okay? So this right here, the gap between the rich and the poor is going to widen. The wealthiest 1% saw their income rise 75%, and the rest of the population saw an increase of only about 9%. All right, again, I don't want to get too big into these numbers, but all I want you to know is that the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Okay, in 1928, President Herbert Hoover is going to win. Now, this is a very significant election. Okay, he ran his campaign on trying to fix some of these economic worries that people have. Like, remember, many of the top economic minds, economists at the time, they saw the danger coming. They said, hey, look, there's a situation that's brewing, and it's been brewing with the way that we've been doing things for the past 10 years since the war ended. Okay, so he kind of runs his campaign on this promise of changing that, trying to make things different. However, this is why this election is significant. All right, so we remember during this time, the Democratic Party sort of represented that old South belief, okay? And what I want you to look at is Texas, right here. Voted Republican. This is going to be one of the only times that this happens during the 20th century, okay? It's going to change in the 1990s when Texas goes from being what we call a blue state, a Democratic state, to a red state, a Republican state. But in 1928, many Texans got behind the Republican Party and Herbert Hoover. This was an overwhelming victory for Herbert Hoover. Excuse me. All right, the stock market. Here's another common misconception about the Great Depression. A lot of people think that what we call the stock market crash, Black Monday, is that it was that this is what caused the Great Depression. It's not. This was a symptom of many of those things that we just talked about. Okay, the stock market crash is just one of those. It was the final sign that there was a serious problem, and when this crashed, that's when things really started to escalate and gain momentum. Okay, I'm kind of hesitant to get into how the stock market works, but what I want you to know about the stock market is that it basically is what gives companies value in America. And not just America, but the entire world. Okay, if a company goes public, normal people can buy what are called stocks. You're able to buy some part of ownership. Okay, and as a result, companies can gain value, and when they gain value, they can do more with that. Okay, there's a lot more to it than that, but this is kind of it in its most basic form. All right, and what I put here, the stock market had become the most visible symbol of the prosperous American economy, and that's true. Okay, the American stock market dominates the world to this day. Okay, there's economic issues everywhere, but there was a reason why that the World Trade Center is located in New York, and it's only a couple of blocks north of the U.S. Stock Exchange. All right, the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Okay, this is basically how people measure the stock market. Okay, it's called the Dow Jones. You're going to hear that word a lot throughout the rest of your lives. Okay, but it looks at the top 30 companies that are in the stock market. Like today, that's going to be Amazon. That's going to be Disney. That's going to be AT&T. It's going to be these big companies that we hear every day, that we use every day. They're going to be the ones that measure the value of the entire stock market through that through that Dow Jones. For those of you that haven't been there, this is the American Stock Exchange. All right, it's really cool. It's a neat place to go. But during the 20s, stock prices rose. That's a decent thing. That's a good sign of the economy. However, when it gets to a point where it's sort of unregulated, meaning it's hard to regulate, then it becomes a problem, okay? By 1929, 4 million Americans owned stocks, okay? That's pretty significant when you look at the population of America at the time. All right, so then it crashes. Black Tuesday. I think I said Black Monday earlier. Okay, Black Tuesday. And this is the day that it finally happens. All right, so what happened was this. On October 24th, the market takes a plunge. Okay, basically, when that happens, people just start to sell. They start to sell like crazy. They're worried about their money. You remember, when you buy stocks, you're basically making an investment in that company. Okay? And so when people start to get nervous about the economy, they start to sell that, then try to get their money back from their investments. And so on Black Tuesday, 16.4 million shares were sold, and it's going to just plummet the stock market, and it's going to create a huge problem because people who bought stock on credit, meaning they didn't really have the money to do that. They borrowed money in the first place to buy stocks. Now companies can't pay that money back. And so people are going to end up taking on huge debts. So this is another graph that's going to show you how this impacts. All right, so September 3rd, we reach our height. Okay, so 1929, September 3rd, stock market, you look throughout the whole 20s, it's going to increase, it's going to increase, it's going to increase, and it's going to peak September 3rd. Almost 2 months later, on October 23rd, that is Black Tuesday, you see it started to decline, and that's where people made that decision to go ahead and start selling. Okay, things are looking kind of down. There's some signs that we've been seeing. And then right there, huge plunge. Within 2-3 weeks, the Dow Jones had reached this level that it had not seen since 1927. And then, as you see, it just keeps going steadily down, further and further and further. Okay, this right here, this part of the graph is all symptomatic of the Great Depression. Okay? So like I said, it wasn't the cause of the Great Depression. It's more of what we think of as the start of it, the final symptom of all these things that added up. Okay, and it's the Great Depression. We define it 1929 to 1940. I would even bump that up to 1941. Okay, World War II is really what's going to help the United States come out of this depression. Okay. All right. So here's another thing that happened was people start to panic. We saw this when coronavirus happened, when people went to the stores and started buying up toilet paper. Okay, when things are starting to look uncertain, people panic and they start doing things without really thinking it through. And so banks at the time did not have any safeguards. Okay, and people start to try to withdraw all their money at once. Okay, what happens? A bank in the middle of nowhere, Texas, only has so much money in its vault. And so if everybody that has their accounts at that bank decides to withdraw at once, when you get to the 50th or 60th person, guess what? The bank doesn't have any money to give them. Now today we don't have to worry about that because they're insured by something that's called FICO. But back then we didn't have that. So 600 banks are going to fail. This happens frequently. Banks come and go. During what we call the Great Recession, which was about 2008, 2009, that also happened. You saw several banks fail during that time. By 1933, basically, I kind of say 1933 is the worst year of the Great Depression. 11,000 banks of the 25,000 banks nationwide had collapsed. All right, and I've already went through this, so I'm not gonna get into it. But all I want you to know is that many countries were impacted by this. All right, this is true today. The United States economy is basically symptomatic of the world economy. All right, so it's in a lot of countries' best interest to sort of work with the United States Stock Exchange because that's where they're going to make their money as well. All right, so hardships. Homelessness goes up. These little shanty towns, they actually get a name called Hoovervilles. And the reason why they're called that is because Herbert Hoover, remember, he's that president that won overwhelmingly. Well, he's going to try to do things, but it really was out of his control. And all of his plans to fix this are going to fail miserably. All right, so some of you guys have probably seen this picture of people lining up. Remember, people are jobless on a level that we've never seen before in our history at that time. And so one of the common features in urban areas is these soup kitchens and bread lines. Okay, they offered free or low cost food for people to get in if you were unemployed. Now, this is the other thing that's going to happen when there is uncertainty, when there are problems in the world. Throughout history, we've seen this where people try to turn to somebody to blame. Well, unfortunately, during this time, it's going to be minorities. Okay, so we have a much higher increase of violence, especially in Texas. You see many people turn to Mexicans living in Texas, and they're going to be forced from their homes and moved back, and then they're going to start to be segregated just like African Americans are. All right, rural life is the hardest, and we're going to look more into this next week, so I'm not going to get too much further into it. I just want you to know that many people lost their jobs, lost their homes, and people living in basically on farmlands, they're going to be the ones that are hit the hardest. And we'll look more at that next week when we get into what's called the Dust Bowl, which is next week. So just a real quick preview of that. The Dust Bowl, there's actually, because why not? In 1934, there's going to be a massive drought. And it's going to dry out everything in the Midwest of the United States. And there's going to be this massive amount of dust that forms from all the dead crops and all the dirt. And it's going to create this situation that is just even worse, because why not throw gasoline on an already burning fire?